Hi, good morning everyone. We're about to start. First of all, welcome to DIVA Day 3 and to our second keynote session. Today's speaker is Marlow, who will join us online as they couldn't be here in person today. Emily is a researcher at the University of Sheffield and they are also curator at the National Video Game Museum in Sheffield, where they have participated in exhibitions such as Luigi Time Bundle, Art of Play, and Physics Bundle. Their work focuses mainly on religion and sexuality in film, video games, and visual media. Emily has also worked as a writer for PC Gamer, TheGamer.com, and TechRad, as well as a research assistant for the Victoria and Albert Museum in London for the Video Games exhibition in 2018. Today, Emily is going to tell us how video games museums work with a talk, Curating from the Margins. Emily, whenever you are ready, the audience is yours.
Great, thank you. Just make sure everyone can hear me. I'm gonna guess it's gonna be yes, I don't know. I'm just gonna soldier on. It feels very weird sort of being in a vacuum and not hearing anyone. I do apologize that I am appearing virtually, but it kind of fits the subject. Right, let's see if this works. Okay, so first things first, I am going to talk about what you should expect with this talk. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, oh, actually, I'm sorry, I'm missing a slide. Oh, of course, this would happen. I know what's happening. Let's just go full screen. Do apologize for this. Just give me a sec. Just having a technical issue, which is really classic for me. Just let me get the folder up and we will get this open. Okay, that's better. No, it should be all right. It's just getting it into full screen mode so that it's showing full slides rather than half slides. Well, fine. Okay, that's fine. So we will. This is a good icebreaker, I guess. Let's do that. Okay, and hopefully that should be yes. Great. Okay, let's start from the start again. So, first things first, hello. My name is Emily Theodore Marlow. I have a bachelor's and a master's. My pronouns are he, she, and they, and I am non-binary. As mentioned, I am studying for a PhD at the University of Sheffield, where I also did my bachelor's and my master's. There I specialize in religion and sexuality in film, video games, and visual media. I'm a curator at the National Video Game Museum, or the NVM, in Sheffield, in the UK. So you'd be expecting around a 45-minute-ish talk. Hopefully it'll be around that timing. You never know. I will put the warning out that there will be bright colors in this talk and some minor ADHD. I have a memory-based disability, which means my short-term memory is really, really bad. If you imagine it's kind of like the random processing power of the brain. Yeah, so I don't have great ones of that, so I may forget names, dates, places, and faces. So do forgive me if that happens, and just feel free to ask questions at the end. So what you should expect from this talk this morning, we're going to cover only a couple of topics. I'm going to be talking mostly in an ad-lib fashion, but it is a kind of linear, on-the-rails talk, as it were. First of all, we're going to talk about video games in museums, and just what they are, what they're doing, and what the different types of video game museum you can see. Then we're going to delve into some of the challenges of video game curation, what to do when everything in your museum can be touched, and just some of the interesting questions video games throw up for the museum sector. Then we're going to delve into kind of a series of case studies, which are looking at what I call queering the museum. Now, this is not a new idea. This is a very established idea in museum studies, but I'm going to take you through some of the ways that I apply these theories into the video game museum itself. And then finally, we'll have a little talk about what we can take away from this talk, what we've learned, and we'll have time for questions. I may talk too fast, so I may talk too slow. Please do not play the music that they play at the Oscars when I talk too long, because that is really embarrassing. So first things first, we should probably make sure that everyone is on an equal ground, and that is firstly to understand the idea of what a curator is. So curating is quite a ubiquitous term now, and it can be used in loads of different ways, from curating a musical playlist to curating a mood board for a wedding. What I do is the kind of standard definition, however, I don't do it in a very standard way. So the definition here is a keeper or custodian of a museum or other collection. So it's someone who not only knows a lot about an object, but also who works to preserve that object and keep it in good condition. So we're kind of like caretakers, which definitely doesn't help in not anthropomorphizing all the objects. So one thing I get asked a lot is, how did I get to become a video game curator? And just like loads of parts of the gaming industry, there's no real standard one way. This is a career that didn't exist when I was a kid, and didn't exist maybe 15, 20 years ago. So it's very much not been a very natural path. So as you can see on this slide, this is me as a very grumpy child in rural Australia, or coastal Australia, I guess. So I was raised in Coffs Harbour, which is in the mid-north coast of Australia. I was really lucky because I grew up as what's now called a third culture kid. So I have a British father, an Australian mother. I was born in New Zealand, and I've lived in New Zealand for quite a while. I was raised in Australia, and I finally settled in the UK. That's a lot of travel for one person, but it also means that I've been witness to loads of different cultures and loads of different ways of talking about culture, and across a lot of boundaries. Looking back on my childhood, I'm very much aware that I was an incredibly lucky child, especially for the study of video games. I first played, the first video game I think I played was California Games for the Atari 2600. So I was playing games at about 5 or 6 years old. My father was incredibly interested in video games, and during my teenage years, he ran a software exchange company, which then became a 1990s internet cafe. So I literally had front row seats to a lot of the development of video games, from close to the beginning, or close to the contemporary beginning at least, all the way up to today. And I definitely had at least one parent who was incredibly enthusiastic for my interest in video games. I also, this last point, just want to point out that I was also really lucky because my parents always asked me what my opinion was on things. I was witness to a lot of things like video games, lots of cinema. I was raised in a theatre household, and our kind of family trips were always to art galleries and museums. So I was given a lot of free culture, and I was always asked what I thought about it. As I said before, this is an incredibly unlikely career path, and I've kind of laid out here for you briefly what it took and what goes into forming my credentials for the job. So I am a two-time college dropout. I finished 1 year of art school and 2 years of a classics degree at 21 years old. I have over 15 years of hospitality experience. I've worked as a bartender, a barback, a barista, a waiter, a record store clerk, a cinema worker, a picture framer, and a roadie. I've done lots of different jobs. I haven't actually listed all the different jobs I've done there, but it has not been a standard pathway. I was diagnosed with ADHD at 35. This was in the second year of my PhD, so it was quite a shock to the system. When I did actually go back to university for good, I then completed 2 degrees in religious studies. So I studied predominantly Christianity and how Christianity is discussed in visual media and reception in general. But I do have essentially a theology degree from the University of Sheffield, and for my master's I did a dissertation on Christ figures in Bioshock Infinite. This master's was kind of the first big work I did on video games, and through that I then went into games journalism, and talks and conferences, fan conferences, and games conferences. I then was incredibly lucky to work for the V&A and get into museum research, and then from then I got the job as a video game curator. So it's not very much the career of go study this degree and this will happen. It's very much a combination of a lot of things happening all at once and adding up to a good result. So I just wanted to pop that on the front. So video games in museums. This is our first kind of little mini topic. There have been many different approaches to exhibiting games, from arcade recreations with minimal interpretations to the rowdy art collective meets experimental party-style events. We're talking baby shambles or wild rompers, to blockbuster exhibitions that delve deep into the art, design, and politics of video games. That would be the design, play, disrupt, or the art of video games. So there are just over 30 museums around the world in total that focus on or primarily feature video games and the culture surrounding video game history. But the question is, how do video game museums actually work? And what makes it different from other museums? So in this series of slides, I've got a collection of images from previous exhibits across the world of video games. On the right here, you can see one of the earliest and probably one of the more prominent video game exhibitions, which was the Art of Video Games in 2012 at the Smithsonian. This was very much a groundbreaking exhibition because it tried to basically explain to everyday visitors why video games are interesting and also why they are worthy of consideration and artistic merit. On the left here, we have Game On, which is from 2023. This is at the Barbican in the UK. This is an incredibly neon style, retro, really interesting exhibition that very much taps into the idea of nostalgia. Here on the left, we have images from War Game, which is a 2023 exhibition from the Imperial War Museum. So this was a really interesting exhibit in the way that it took a subject that is actually quite difficult to talk about in video game museums and exhibitions, and it made it the central focus of it. It's, as you can see from the picture, it is really quite stylized and quite empty, unlike a lot of other video game exhibitions. This is not like the bold neon type you're looking for. It's actually a lot more subdued. It kind of matches on the right here, Never Alone, which is from the MoMA. So the MoMA has a history of exhibiting video games as artistic pieces. They have a very stylized way of doing their exhibitions, and they're very much more on the museum side rather than on the playable arcade side. I would be remiss to not mention Design, Play, Disrupt. So I got to work on this exhibition in 2018. I primarily worked on the program book that went alongside the exhibition. But I also got a chance to do some research for several parts of the exhibition itself. Design, Play, Disrupt really was trying to take a look at the design of video games and also face the challenge of convincing V&A regular visitors that video games are not just for kids and that they are a topic worthy of this kind of deep discussion. It didn't stop them from having playable and really interesting aspects to that exhibit design. So with each of these exhibits, you're seeing that there are many different approaches to exhibiting games. You've got things like, your recreations, like the Game On the left, with the neon, that have minimal interpretation. This is also seen in things like Games Britannica and larger expos where you've just got a large amount of games and there's not really any conversation around why these games are here. Each of these exhibitions appears to choose a particular aspect of gaming to feature on and to emphasize, whether it's the genre, like in war games, or the developers, in one of my personal favorites, E.O. Stern's work, or the practices, like the design of the V&A. Right here. So this is, I just want to mention a couple of my personal favorites that have been incredibly influential on my particular video game curation. Obviously, Design, Play, Disrupt was incredibly influential on me because it was one of my first chances to see how we exhibit games and what the logistics of that really are. But the second one is actually an exhibit I saw at DIGRA in 2016. This was exhibited at the Dundee Contemporary Arts space, and they had a large work series on Edo Stern's games. And as you can see, they're really exhibited in kind of an insane three-dimensional way. On the right here, this was a fully playable game that was loaded into this giant monitor that you could walk fully around. And on the left, this is a configuration of UI. So that main part is your main viewing screen, whereas the others are all your dials and hubs. These were all projected into this wonderful kind of dark space, so it felt like the video game was all around you. And finally, in this tour of like what's happening and how video game museums currently work, I'm going to give a shout out to the NVM itself. So this is some pictures from our most recent exhibition, or large-scale exhibition that we did, which is the Art of Play in 2022. This was a really challenging 6-month project that we put together. It was a lot of hard work, but mainly we really wanted to create an exhibit that was not just for children and not just for gamers. We wanted to take the idea and the question of, can video games be considered art, and instead turn that on its head and make that a statement. We wanted to really champion this idea and demonstrate how creative practices from the real world are being used in video games, even in digital spaces. So we tried to make things quite bold and quite visual. I myself am a visual learner, so I very much, this is kind of what I live for. I do apologize for the bright colors. This is the CYMK color scheme that the NVM runs for. It can be a bit of an assault on the eyes. So, I know I'm saying so a lot. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about challenges in video game curation. How hard could it be? So, how do you run over 100 games simultaneously? Some of them on original consoles. How can you talk about recreating real-world locations and not mention Grand Theft Auto? Does a game have to be played to be enjoyed, and should we enjoy all video games? And most importantly, or it seems to a lot of people to be the most important, who chooses the games that are exhibited? Video games present incredibly unique challenges to the field of museum studies and management, from discovering ways to interpret abandoned games, to representing players, play styles, and global industries, to simply finding a working CRT. And believe me, we have looked. There are loads of challenges to presenting and exhibiting video games, which we are going to pull through. But the great thing about these challenges is they are also opportunities, and they are opportunities for truly transformative museum experiences. On the left here, I've got the images of Myst. I've got that here just as a kind of reference because we are currently in the midst of attempting to program Myst into the museum, and I had just yesterday, I had an email from my creative director saying that he would really like Myst into the gallery, and the question, of course, that comes up is, which version do you mean? So, this is the big mamma jamma, this is the large slide. Here we have the many and varied challenges of video game curation. I've put them in 4 sections, and I'm just going to loosely talk through them. Feel free to ask me questions about this at the end, because it is kind of all over the place. So the first topic is conservation. So, whilst many people think that video game objects are ubiquitous, that's not always the case. Just because something is mass produced doesn't mean that it's always going to be order. Also, a current contemporary problem that we have in video game museums is the rise in retro gaming, popularity of that. This has meant that a lot of things that could previously be obtained at kind of understandable prices have now skyrocketed. And there's actually a real growing trend in people collecting mementos from gaming history. And this has been good and bad for us. The bad part is just the scarcity and not being able to obtain a console or a game, or having deleted files, or having unplayable files. All these kind of issues come up with the idea of conservation. The other problem, of course, is the ever-disappearing game libraries online, the loss of things like the Flash game history, and the changes in browsers and different systems that have meant that there's whole eras and hundreds of thousands of games which have been lost just due to obsolete systems. Lastly, the lack of physical items that are being produced for games in contemporary gaming is really difficult for museums to deal with, because if you can't represent a game in a physical way, how do you talk about it? And if that physical object doesn't exist, what is there to, symbolize this game? The second challenge section is content and audiences. So this is the question of, can we exhibit this game? There's lots of topics within gaming history that are not really for general admission. In-game violence, profanity, drug use, nudity, suicide, all of these things are basically reflected in the age limits of games that we know, the censorship and the rating systems of games. When we have these age rating systems and we have the idea that we want a museum to be accessible to everyone, it means that we have to set the rating of the games to one that is of general admission. This doesn't mean, though, that we can't talk about games that are 15 plus or adult games. It just kind of means that we probably won't have a playable version of it. And that in itself is a whole topic. The other things that come up under content and audience are the filtering system of how we talk about video games. So I'm often a person who's trying to protect the language of gaming, or gamer speak. I think that just as much as video games and historic stories should be told and retold, I think our gaming language should also be preserved. But we've also got to make the museum accessible to people, so we need to break down that jargon. Then of course you've got the decision between a playable game and an historically important game. We recently had a situation on the left here. We have the Jurassic Park Trespasser from 1997. So we had some concerns about running Jurassic Park 1. We didn't have Windows, I think, 98, which is what we needed to run it on. But we knew that this was an incredibly important game in terms of physics. So we programmed it in because we wanted people to realize just how far we've come. We didn't really want them to have a big, long, fun experience with Jurassic Park Trespasser. We wanted them to have a look at it and see the gaps in between that. On the next slide, right next to it, we had Portal 2. So it was kind of like, this is the gap between physics and then and now. Our third section of challenges is emulation and philosophy. So the question of, can it be played? Do we have the technology, or can it be run? There's loads of times where I'll try to feature a game or talk about a game and we can't program it because we can't run it. We did want to do a massive feature on Angry Birds, but you can't run the original version of Angry Birds anymore. Also, the philosophy aspect of this comes in when we have people critiquing how we have emulated a game. So we often emulate games if they're slow or have loading errors. We emulate them so that that's a smoother ride. And so we take out loading zones, just make it a bit faster, bring it a bit up to date. A lot of people find that this is not actually representative of the classic video game experience. And you have that question of, is it really Sonic 2 if it's not shown on the CRT? What difference does it make how it's viewed or how it comes across? Is emulation true preservation? And then it's the question, again, deep philosophy of, is the console or the game, the practice, the player, what is on display here? What are we actually looking at? So you've got to consider all of these hybrid aspects when you're displaying games. And the last section, and some of the silliest challenges in video games are the ideas of money, access, and class. Unfortunately, in this year, 2023, we are still trying to convince people that video games are worth it. Video games are interesting. So funding and convincing other people of their merit is part of the job. Getting funding, trying to secure funding, do grants, stuff like that. We are a charity, most museums are, and right now that means not being able to do certain things because you can't afford to, or because you can't get funding to. The question after that is who gets to play? Who has access to the museum, who has the ability to use the computers in the museum, and also who has the time, who has the money to see it, all these sort of topics. Who gets to talk about games, who are we focusing in our production and in our dissemination of this knowledge, what voices are we looking at, who gets to exhibit games, who gets given the renown of being video game curators or video game museums, and who are we focusing on? Who's speaking? Who's getting the focus? There's a lot of aspects of our work that are basically rewriting history, in the sense of there's a perceived history of gaming that doesn't really reflect the actual incredibly diverse history of video games and their origins. So moving on, just a little bit about the National Video Game Museum where I work. So it first opened as the National Video Game Arcade in Nottingham in 2015. The NVM now lives in Sheffield in South Yorkshire and is currently celebrating 5 years in that location. So on the dotted line, our mission, via our mission statement, is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and interpret video games for everyone. So when I started at the museum a few years ago, we were still in the midst of lockdown. We were locked down for quite a long period of time, and we locked down ahead of time as well, mainly because of the way that our museum ran. We are an interactive museum, and people can touch everything and move around freely. This meant that when the pandemic hit, we basically had to close our doors early and really think newly about how we were going to do things. Because of this, we then had a kind of digital shift in how we looked at games and how we interacted with the public, whether that meant making downloadables, doing live streams, or creating wholly digital projects. All of these things had to change, and they had to change really quick. A lot of us were working from home, luckily, during this time, but we definitely lost crew and just struggled like pretty much all of us did. One of the things that was born out of this period was the Animal Crossing Diaries. This was a project we did where we collected essentially letters from people who had played Animal Crossing, and we shared collective experiences during the pandemic through Animal Crossing. So we had like live streams for this where we were on our own islands discussing video games and just playing the curators all together and doing that as live streams so that we can have a little bit more interaction with our visitors even though they can't come and see us. And lastly, this also was a period of listening and learning. We have had loads of community consultation into how we run the museum, lots of accessibility testing and checking, and just run through so that all of our visitors can feel safe and feel comfortable when they're in the museum. So this section is mainly about how I do games curation. As I said before, this isn't my idea. This is born of a lot of different academics and a lot of different previously established curators. I'm thinking of people like Margaret Middleton and my previous mentors, Marie Falston, and definitely several other people whose names I'm forgetting right now. But yeah, I'm just going to go quickly through the process of how we take roughly the idea of queer theory in cultural studies and how we apply that to the museum. I've got a couple of quotes here that kind of set the mood for this. The first is from Catherine Isbister from her wonderful book, How Games Move Us, where she says, game designers are, in effect, molding our social milieu and the way we build ties with one another, as well as shaping how we see ourselves. And the second is from, I'm going to butcher this name, Hans Ulrich Obrist, who is the head curator of the Serpentine, and it's from his book, Ways of Curating. He's talking about collections, and he says, to make a collection is to find, acquire, organize, and store items, whether in a room, a house, a library, a museum, or a warehouse. It is also, inevitably, a way of thinking about the world. So the three main ways that we interpret and bring this idea of queering the museum into play are these three that I've got listed here. So the first is looking at games outside the AAA. The second is embracing failure. And the third is making the technical personal. In looking at games outside the AAA, this is the concept of thinking outside the box. It's a very broad interpretation of queer theory, but it's that idea of just thinking outside the screen for once. This also means looking beyond AAA games and trying to find more experimental or independently made games. It also means experimenting with experience, the ways of exhibiting, and uncovering hidden and marginalized voices. The second is embracing failure. So what can happen when we allow ourselves to fail? Is failure the end or another beginning? And can anyone ever make the power glove uncool? I think not. And the last is making the technical personal. So this is how to make ubiquitous objects special, bringing the inanimate to life, and highlighting the people who make games happen. So in the first is this idea of looking outside the AAA. So as I said, this is that idea of thinking outside the box, whether it be through interpretation or exhibit design, how you move about the space, how things are demonstrated or portrayed. For us at the NBM, this has meant focusing on smaller companies and their developers alongside these larger groups. So in Art of Play, for example, we had Monument Valley really big, but then we also had a massive cabinet and displays of No Longer Home, which was a two-person independent game made by Transit and Binary creators set in London. So very, very different from Monument Valley, both in funding and story. This kind of focus allows us to highlight, as I said, the already diverse history of video games industry. A lot of people are often saying that we need to get girls into gaming, we need to make gaming for families, and a lot of the early gaming history, there were a lot of women, and it was for a lot of families. There's loads more diversity than you think in gaming history. This falls into the second part here of upholding minority voices. So this we do via continual redesigning of museum systems in order to facilitate better accessibility for people like myself who are neurodiverse, disabled, and also other marginalized visitors to museums. So the underprivileged, the unemployed, the young, the old, just everyone who's not normally getting the chance to game. We also, as I said, have programming from underrepresented voices in games development, and a great history of trans curators and neurodiverse folk on our, and LGBTQ plus folk on our staff. So the second principle we have here, and probably my favorite, is the idea of embracing failure. So I was asked recently if we ever talk about the negative at the NVM, because our curation comes across as very positive and very bright. And I really love the idea of failure. And it's something that we've actually talked about a lot, and it's a way that we have talked about the negative and interpreted it for the positive. So the first example we've got here on the right is probably my favorite thing that I've put together, which is the Tony Hawk 2001 Escape Odyssey design. This was, we had a bundle which was around sports, and the main thing we needed for this bundle was something really eye-catching that would draw people's attention. And so we chose to take the Tony Hawk skateboard and put it in this giant plinth that kind of resembles the 2001 monolith, and just really make it into this massive focus so that it really, you come around the corner and you're like, why is there a skateboard in this beautiful plinth? This was kind of to talk about that idea of video games objects as works of art, and to make people interpret things in a kind of new way. And it also is an act of preservation of gaming practices, because on the back of this board there are Velcro tapes that are there for safety. The second way we've talked about embracing failure is via the focus on the Power Glove. So we had a kind of an object of the month talk about the Power Glove, and you can talk about how great people think the Power Glove is, but this is a product that kind of sold for a year and a half and then was made obsolete. It's very hard to talk about it in that kind of longevity thing, but the interesting thing about the Power Glove is how it literally is a stepping stone towards things like the Wii and like more developed motion control. And that was the way that we looked at it, was the idea of just flipping that on its head and thinking, how does it actually, how can we make this a positive? So the final section in this is the idea of making the technical personal. This is something that I've really tried my best to get across into the museum, and it's something that came out of our new focus after COVID. During that time, previously to that, we had a very technical museum. We had a lot of devices that didn't have a lot of interpretation, and were just kind of grey boxes. So the challenge with this Famicom exhibition that we did was to try and make these things personal, and try and make these things more approachable. So the way we did it with the Famicom was to look at it through the lens of its lead engineer, Masayuki Uemura. So Uemura was a really interesting character, but when you actually look at the Famicom and you look at the research done by our wonderful Professor James Newman, who did massive work on this, you look at the idea, you revealed this story of a Japanese system that was made specifically for the Japanese home. There's something incredibly personal in the Famicom, and that was something that we kind of sought to really focus on when we were talking about Weber. We also displayed the Famicom on one side and the NES on the other, and we sort of compared the two and looked at the global differences in marketing between the two. We made sure that this whole collection of works and objects were kind of grounded in the familial ties between them and the connections between Uemura and these objects. The second case study we have for this is Chris Blythe's desk. So this is the centerpiece of the Art of Play. We have art director from Worms and Worms to Chris Blythe. We have his Amiga 4000 that he used to make the cinematics from Worms. We have that on display. If you haven't seen an Amiga before, it's a big cream-colored box, which if you are 8 years old and living in 2023, you're going to have no idea what that is. So with this design, we basically recreated Chris's desk at the time that he was making the games. We have several objects around it, like his contract of employment, his commemorative watch, and a few other items that just kind of really make you instantly aware that this is a desk. We also have on display his diary, which is one of the objects we use to kind of explain that game developers are actually people and that they keep dates and forget dates just the same as the rest of us. So I seem to be doing okay for time, but just to hit the conclusions of where we are. So, first things first, we are alive and living in a time where video game museums exist, and not just one, over 30, which means that there has to be at least 60 curators out there. They're all over the world. It's pretty cool. The 14-year-old in me, really enjoys that. And I think that's something we should celebrate. It's pretty cool. Video game museums have limits and unique challenges. There's loads of problems with them and loads of obstacles to overcome. But these are also really incredible opportunities for transformation and for wondrous play. It just opens whole new doors for visitors. Querying the museum, this is just some ideas that you can take home to look at how you can rethink, relook at objects, really start to expand your mind on what makes a game and what makes an exhibit an exhibit. And lastly, the mission, as always, is to protect games and their culture. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not say trans rights, because I currently live in the UK. You can imagine just about how good that is. So that's it, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. I've got my details here. You can shoot me an email. I'm always interested to hear from you. That was the Jurassic Park theme song playing. Please, if I don't reply quickly, hit me up again. I may have forgotten about it. I do have a memory disability. And hit me up on Twitter or my website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily, so much. We have time for some questions from the audience. Okay, we have. Please let me know if you can hear.
Thank you so much. I have a very quick question.
Just 1 second. Amy, can you hear me?
Okay, perfect.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Also, the slides are very playful. That's great. I just want to ask about the legal or maybe like IP related side of things, since we know that, for example, Nintendo is a super terrible company when it comes to allowing its games to be emulated and towards community and stuff like that. So are there any maybe even specific cases or hurdles you encounter in your practice when it comes to the willingness of the companies and corporate structures themselves in cooperating with your institution and maybe your desired execution program? Thanks so much, and thanks for the talk again.
Sorry, that was a bit jumbled toward the end. What was the actual question?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I will try to speak slower. If there are any specific IP or legal, corporate IP defensiveness related issues in your practice, and the fact that those might be at odds, may perhaps with your desired outcome of the exhibitions, let's say.
So I think the question was one of, sorry, what was that? I think the question was one of how you deal with video game IPs and corporate issues of that. Is that part of the question? Sorry, it's quite difficult to hear.
You want to come here, you can join the stage if you want to.
Anyway, no one wants people to the spotlight. It's just quite jumping.
So like, no worry.
You can even see me down. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much for the talk. My question was related to the fact how I can imagine that the companies themselves who are making games, distributing games as corporate structures, like for example Nintendo is very well known for being very stringent. How does that play into your practice? And I guess there might be some tensions between the IP protectionism and your desired exhibition outcome. Thanks so much, and thanks for playing the slides.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so it's very much, we're in a very gray zone as far as how games corporations interact with museums. There's often a case of you kind of don't want to let them know that you're doing anything, because if they know, they have to say no, but if they don't know, they can, it'll be fine. There's those kind of really gray areas, but then there's also the case of, we have loads of game companies who we've worked alongside, who I'm thinking mainly of Marlow, who made Game. They were very much the opposite side. Once they knew that we were interested in looking at the game, they basically invited us to the studio, let us take whatever we wanted for display, and just generally are really great and generous with their time. So it really depends on the company. When we did our work on the Famicom, a lot of that was in collaboration with Japanese universities, but not in connection to Nintendo itself. When we did Animal Crossing Diaries, we talked a lot about Animal Crossing and the Switch, but we weren't actually even connected to them. So it's really dependent on the company and on the game. And yes, it is quite a limitation sometimes, and difficult problems.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and we have one in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. Can you read it? It's from someone watching online. Leandro asked.
Yes. Says, regarding challenges of games conservation, what do you think about the use of oral histories of gaming practices or soft hardware? Can it be a way to circumnavigate the loss of the materiality of games? This is kind of bang on exactly what we try to do with the NVM. So with the Art of Play, half of the Art of Play was a project called Living Collections. And this was essentially looking at game makers and game players as collections of history themselves. It was a series of long-form conversations with several developers, people from Monument Valley, Lumino City, No Longer Home, and Chris Blythe from Worms. And it was just sort of like collecting what it was like to make these games, what their feelings were like, what they were aiming for, what they were disappointed by, what they were excited by. And this is the way that we can preserve games contemporarily. If we don't have something physical to point to, we have experience and we have the people who have made these games. And that's kind of a collection on itself.
Okay, thank you so much. We have run out of time, and now we will move to the coffee break. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you. Okay, cheers. Excellent.